evening, and welcome to the Islesboro Forum. We are at the halfway point. This is our fourth program out of 6. For those who are not as familiar with the Islesboro Forum, this is our 33rd consecutive year. We kept on marching right through COVID, and we've had just a long list and constellation of outstanding, distinguished speakers over that time, and tonight is no exception. I'll go over a few points that I typically mention to all of you. We are a nonprofit. We do have some modest expenses, and we ask that you consider a contribution to the forum in the course of the summer. And usually we have this nice aesthetic woven wicker bowl. Someone took it, so now we have a stainless steel mixing bowl, but it's larger, so let it flow, and I'm sure that Peter Rothschild, our treasurer, will stand up at the end and direct you to it. So I do want to tell you just a bit about next week's speaker, because when we finish this program, you folks are ready to head in multiple directions. And we have a very, very exciting topic for next week. It's called Science Under Siege, and the speaker is a presidential distinguished professor at the University of Pennsylvania in the Center for Climate and Environmental Science. His book, however, I believe focuses on the issues that arise when when science is challenged in an unscientific way. So we're going to get the scoop because it does not come out until September, and so we will be hearing about it before it's actually released officially, and I'm sure you'll see him on television shows once it is out. So you will have seen him first here, and he is the proud son of an Islesboro resident who's in the audience, Larry Mann, for those of you who know him, in the second row, right behind. Yes, yes. So I urge you all to make some time in your schedule for that. And now I would like to turn the microphone over to Peter Latman to make a more detailed introduction of our speakers and of the Maine Monitor. Peter is the managing director of the Emerson Collective, and before that, I believe he had a distinguished career in journalism himself. Is that fair to say, Peter?
I don't know about distinguished.
Well, I'll put distinguished around it. And so, Peter, I will let you tell our audience about the people who are on stage and what they're going to be hearing about.
Hi there. So I'm Peter Latman, and up here in Islesboro, I like to introduce myself as Linda and Arch Gilley's son-in-law and Isabel Gilley's wife. But on the mainland, in my professional life, I identify myself as the head of media at Emerson Collective, which is an organization that was started and is run by Lorene Powell Jobs. And I oversee our work in journalism, which includes The Atlantic, and also supporting philanthropically some great newsrooms like the Maine Monitor. And I'll get to them in a second. But it's a thrill to be here and a real honor to have the Maine Monitor staff on our island to talk a little bit about their work. But first, I just wanted to say, so when I was growing up, my dad would always sing this song from the Music Man called You Got Trouble. And he'd sing, we got trouble right here in River City. Capital T, that rhymes with P, that stands for pool. You guys know that song? Yeah, he'd always sing it. But so now we've got trouble in River City, but the P doesn't stand for pool, it stands for the press. And we've got some issues in our country as it relates to the media broadly. For starters, the federal government has led the charge to defund public media, and just on Friday, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting shut down. In Atlanta, a respected Spanish-language journalist named Mario Guevara was arrested and placed in the hands of immigration authorities. He remains in custody for doing his job of reporting, which is a stark reminder that the threats that journalists face aren't just rhetorical. At the same time, the business of journalism is really under siege. Just recently, the parent company of CBS News, a great American journalism institution, made extraordinary concessions to complete a merger with the Ellison family. And, at this point, it's barely worth mentioning, but for a decade now, the national press has been attacked as enemies of the people. And just a couple of weeks ago, the White House sued the Wall Street Journal. So it's grim times for the media, I think, in the United States right now. But perhaps the most acute crisis facing us and our democracy is the crisis in local media and local news. And you just have to open up your gutted local newspaper, which are really mostly shadows of their former selves, to understand that the business model of local news is imperiled, and it's not coming back. There's been a market failure in the newspaper industry, and as a result, people aren't getting the information that they need to be informed and engaged citizens. But there's hope, and the hope is right here on stage, because there's a quiet but powerful revival underway around the United States, and nonprofit local newsrooms are filling the void that has been left by the collapse of the traditional newspaper industry. These newsrooms are proving that local journalism can be sustainable when it's rooted in public service rather than just for profit. These newsrooms are covering city councils, school board meetings, environmental threats, public corruption. This is the reporting that keeps communities informed and power in check. In this era of disinformation and media consolidation, these newsrooms are rebuilding trust, reflecting local voices, and strengthening democracy from the ground up. And in a state like Maine, which is vast and rural and independent, the need for watchdog reporting is particularly urgent. And that's what makes the Maine Monitor so essential. Its reporters are digging into the real issues affecting Mainers' lives, holding power to account, and helping the citizens of Maine make informed decisions about their lives. So at Emerson Collective, we're proud to support the Maine Monitor and other organizations like it. So please join me in welcoming Micah, Kate, and Rose, the senior staff of the Maine Monitor.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate that introduction and putting this talk in context. Just to add a little bit onto what Peter said in terms of Maine specifically, we continue to see newspapers closing in Maine. Just in the last year, we've seen half a dozen hyper-local small-town newspapers close. We've seen the Maine Trust for Local News, which has the largest consortium of newspapers, reduce circulation. So its most rural publications are now down to being published every other week. And as we go around the state, we consistently hear from people that they are not getting the kind of reporting that they need from their local newspapers where they still exist. The Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, which publishes the Maine Monitor, has been doing nonprofit journalism for 15 years. We started as a watchdog news organization. We remain a watchdog news organization. We are nonprofit. And one of the things that I find really interesting about news at this stage is while trust in national news is at an all-time low. Trust in local news still is very, very high. And part of that is because people get to see us on a regular basis. But for us, we really feel accountable to our readers, our supporters, our community. And one of the ways that we try and demonstrate that that trust or build that trust is by being very transparent. And this year, we undertook a project to become members of the Trust Project, which is an international movement to try and have news publications meet certain standards that have been agreed to for transparency and accountability. So we're really proud of that. And everybody that goes on our website can see that. One of the other things that we do that's really important in terms of trying to rebuild local news in Maine is we also give away all of our news for free for republication by Maine news organizations. Last year in 2024, our work was published an enormous number of times. I don't remember the exact number, but what I do remember is that it was about 1,000% increase in the number of republications of our reporting. That just shows you that the need for content by news organizations is really great as they've had to cut staff. So that's just a little Maine context for you, a little topper on what Peter's excellent comments on the state of journalism in the United States. The topic of our talk tonight is how the Maine Monitor is keeping Mainers informed and meeting the moment. So Kate, I want to start with a conversation about that, meeting the moment. We are a Maine-focused news organization, but there's no denying that developments in Washington, D.C. have been the top news story of the last 8 months. So can you start us off by talking about how the Maine Monitor newsroom is meeting that moment? How are you dealing with the overwhelming issues that are coming out of Washington through a Maine lens?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so when the new administration began and we saw just this avalanche of changes and news, my deputy editor and I had a lot of conversations around how do we cover this in a way that makes sense for our readers, for the people of Maine, and is, sort of beyond what the just brief headlines of, this was cut here or that was cut here or this was changed here. And I think, we really leaned into who we are as an organization. We decided that we were going to not be reactive. We were going to take our time. We were going to aim to provide as much context as possible. And we were going to be really deliberate about what we chose to cover. I will give, a couple of examples of that as we go on, but that was really where we decided to focus our energy. And I think, one of the things I thought about a lot back in January and February was this question of what is investigative journalism? Because, our mission is to really provide this sort of enterprise investigative journalism. And we get asked this question a lot, like what does that actually mean to you? And where we have kind of settled, I think one of the answers that makes the most sense for me is that it is giving people access to information that they could not otherwise easily get themselves. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can mean, filing Freedom of Information Act requests and then wading through the documents that we get from them. We've done a lot of reporting on the public defender system in Maine. Our work was, Maine actually did not have a public defender system, and then we started writing about it, and now we have started one. We're following the developments there. I would credit the Monitor with much of that development. So that involved, hours and hours and hours of sifting through these records that we obtained from the state. We also do a lot of explanatory journalism, and so that can look like, just explains to people how their government works in a really simple and accessible way. So, some of that information might be out there, but what we are doing is making sure that people can get access to it, that it's free, and that it's also supporting the broader news ecosystem in Maine, as Mika said, in that, any news organization around the state and, around the country, our work is republished in the Boston Globe as well, and by the Associated Press. Any news organization can reprint our stories at no cost to themselves. So I think, that's a long answer to your question, but we think about this all the time. How will we be additive in this environment?
And
Yeah.
your use of the word deliberate, I wanted to go back to that because I remember one week, maybe in February, where every day there was new information about what kind of funding was being withheld for Maine specifically. This was after the infamous, for those of you that saw it, the infamous interaction between the president and Janet Mills in Washington. And Maine all of a sudden had a spotlight on it from Washington. And every day there was a new piece of news, and by the end of the week, I was very confused about what was happening. But the advantage, and we should mention this, the Maine Monitor publishes weekly. Mm-hmm. And so can you talk about just how the newsroom responded in that instance?
Yeah, absolutely. There was, obviously, as you all know, there was just this barrage of news, and we were all getting overwhelmed and trying to understand what it meant. And we do put out a weekly publication, which is, a lot more time than daily reporters have just right at the beginning. But we also really allow our reporters to take their time. I like to call it slow journalism. We are constantly holding things on Friday afternoon if they are not ready and we need more information or we have to go back, which is a real privilege in the world of journalism. But I think it's really important. And so in this, in one of these instances Mika is talking about, we had seen a lot of cuts to NIH funding in Maine. And so one of our reporters, Emily Bader, actually went in to the NIH database and looked at a suite of funding over the last 10 years that has come into Maine from the NIH, the FDA, and the CDC. And she spent several weeks kind of crunching this data and ultimately came up with this really wonderful and full story that looked at the funding coming into Maine from those organizations over the past decade. And it was, you could see it both in charts. It was an interactive visualization, so you could also, it's still up on our website, you can also click on each organization to see where the money went. And then she profiled a number of the projects that had gotten funding. So, we did talk about the cuts and we did talk about where they might be impacting, but we also really looked at the context around them and what this has looked like over the past decade. And I think, our hope was that gave readers a much fuller understanding of what this would mean for science in the state.
The other example, and I'm sorry I'm going to bring this up too, but Maine's school budget process is all throughout the spring. And as I was attending RSU 71's school budget conversations each week, questions of what about federal funding kept coming up as well, including state funding, and we can get to Augusta in a minute. But at the same time, we had a new reporter, Christian, who was starting to report on education. And maybe you could just talk about a little bit Christian's reporting and how she was helping to make sense of what was going on, which the timing of it was really essential.
Yeah, the timing was not planned, but really worked out quite well. Christian did some really excellent pieces that looked at just a broad overview of the federal funding for education that came into Maine and where it went. But she also did that in the context of these budget discussions that were happening all over the state at the local level. And I'm sure you've seen it here. We've seen a lot more pushback of school budgets in recent years in Maine, at least sort of just to my anecdotal recollection. And so she did a lot of reporting from various school districts around the state about what was kind of causing all of that pushback and what was causing school budgets to go up so much at the local level. She sort of took one town actually in western Maine called in Emden, which is in Somerset County. And we had gotten a tip from our partners at the Bangor Daily News. We have a relationship with their investigative news team over there. And they had said, you know, hey, there's something going on in Emden. This school budget fight has gotten really, really contentious. And we don't have the bandwidth to look into it. Can you send somebody over there? And so Christian went over to Emden, and she took quite a bit of time. It took many weeks to kind of gain the trust of the folks who were there because the issue had been written about previously, and it had sort of only inflamed tensions. So she went over there and she gained the trust of these people, and she also requested a lot of documents and data from the state to help understand what was going on in the sort of broader state context. And we ultimately wound up publishing 4 pieces. We published the feature on what was going on in Emden, and we made sure that that came out before folks went to the polls on June 10th. So that they could make an informed decision when they actually went to vote on the budget. And then we published 3 subsequent pieces that put Emden in the broader state context of these budget fights and the funding and everything that was going on at the federal level. So I think that was a great example where we really just pulled in everything and used the lens of this local school district to really shine a light on all of these fights around the state. I thought that was an excellent example of Maine Monitor reporting.
It really was. And
Yeah.
I do have to say, I know I'm the executive director, so my job and my passion is promoting the Maine Monitor. But I will tell you the story, which was I would be sitting in these weekly school budget meetings, and questions would come up about, well, how does this work? How does the school budget process, from colleagues around me sitting in the audience? And I would pull up Christian's reporting on my phone, and my phone would start getting passed around, and I'd have to keep track of it because I'm like, I need that back. You can look that up yourself. It's themainemonitor.org. But that was a real example of how our reporting is informing decisions that are being made on a weekly basis. The other time I often found myself pulling out my phone and citing reporting is Rose's reporting on healthcare access in Maine. Rose is our senior reporter. She's been with us now for 4 years. Is that 5 years? Okay, time flies. And she has developed a real expertise in the field of public health, healthcare in Maine, and particularly care for older Mainers, and has done some excellent reporting, including a project a year ago with ProPublica. But I think what I wanted to have you talk about is what are the issues that you are following right now, given how much you know about healthcare in Maine. What are the issues that concern you most and that you're doing reporting on right now?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in healthcare right now, I would say. The number one thing that I hear about a lot in Maine is the contraction of services and facilities across our healthcare system. I see some of you nodding. I'm sure everybody is kind of aware of how we've seen these aspects of our health system disappearing over time. This isn't a new trend, but we're seeing a lot of increases. For example, we've had 26 nursing homes close in Maine in the last decade. That's a fourth of our nursing homes. We have half of our hospitals now have maternity wards, and we've seen hospital closures like Inland Hospital and Waterville. And so just everyone I talk to in healthcare is just really worried about, we're seeing these services pull back, and then hospitals are kind of cutting down on services as well because of financial pressures. And so we see that a lot, especially in our rural areas are really impacted. You know, if your hospital no longer has a maternity ward and you have to drive an hour to give birth, I mean, that's a pretty tangible impact on our lives here in Maine. The second thing that is really on my radar are changes to Medicaid through the big, beautiful bill that was passed by Congress earlier this year. We're going to see a lot of impact from that. There were changes to eligibility and work requirements and immigration status for qualifying for Medicaid. And so the state expects that 34,000 Mainers will no longer be on Medicaid as a result of these changes. And obviously that impacts the people who no longer have health coverage, but it also impacts everybody else in the state, because if you just because you don't have health insurance doesn't mean you might not have a health crisis. And so people still have to go to the hospital, go to the emergency room and get care when they have a crisis. But if they don't have insurance, the hospital then the hospital is required to provide care still, and they build that into their budget, and it's something called uncompensated care. So they do expect some level of that kind of expense. But when we have more people who don't have insurance, you have a lot more of that uncompensated care. And when I talked to Northern Light about this, they said, in order to we have to balance our budget somehow. I mean, we'll have to make cuts, and the result is we'll have to cut full services for everybody, and when there's an impact. So that impacts all of us, regardless of our insurance status. And then something that was top of mind for me this week, I published a story on health insurance rates for next year. They're going to skyrocket. And I looked at a particular group of people that it's individuals and small group employers. So it's only 116,000 Mainers, so it's a small group. But what they are experiencing will be indicative of what everybody else is going, because we're all subject to the same market forces. And so the state reviews proposed health insurance increases that are submitted by the carriers. And this year we are seeing proposed rate increases of up to 30%. On average, individuals could face 26% increases in their health insurance rates. And the top insurance expert in Maine, he's been doing this 25 years, and he told me he's never seen a proposed increase of 30%. So we're going to see a huge jump. And even if you're not in that group of people that I mentioned, insurance across the board, I mean, we're all subject to the same forces. And the top two reasons he gave, especially in Maine, is rising prescription drug costs. They were already rising. New tariffs on imported goods could make that even worse. And then the second factor is, particularly in Maine, we don't have a lot of competition in our health system. We have Northern Light and we have Maine Health, pretty much. And so that drives up costs of services. We rely heavily on inpatient services, which is expensive. And so Maine is going to be among the highest increases for health insurance rates next year. And on top of that, we could see the expiration of the enhanced premium tax credit. So Congress has to vote to extend it. Otherwise, it'll disappear on January 1st. And that matters because 50,000 Mainers qualify for that premium tax credit, and it reduces their monthly premium bills by, on average, $180. So on January 1st, people could suddenly have to pay $180 more for their premium, and they could also have a premium that is up to 30% higher than it was. So that's going to be a huge, huge change going forward.
So, Rose, your expertise on healthcare in Maine is really phenomenal, as we've just seen. The other thing that I think is really impressive is the network of contacts that you've developed during your 5 years here. And I've seen you cultivate folks that don't necessarily start out with a lot of trust, but grow to trust you. And I think a good example of that was the live journalism event that we did in May. We do periodic live journalism events where we invite the journalists to put together a panel of people that they've been talking to about their reporting topics, and then do a discussion where we invite the audience to also ask questions. So it's an opportunity for our readers to really delve into the topic and hear from people directly and ask questions of people directly. But we did a panel in May on rural access to healthcare. Maybe you could talk a little bit about who was on the panel, and also what happened at the panel.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of cast a wide net. So we had 4 panelists. One was from the Maine Hospital Association. One was a long-term care provider, has multiple facilities across the state, nursing homes and assisted living. And then a third was an academic with expert in maternity care. And then a fourth was a long-time public health advocate who works on the ground in Dover-Foxcroft, so had a very kind of rural perspective of what health looks like on the ground. And so we wanted to kind of cover a lot of different ground and see where the overlap was. And to your point, one of the panelists, the long-term, I write a lot about aging issues, and sometimes not always the most flattering coverage sometimes, so some people in that industry are hesitant around me, but the person we asked to be on that panel was really resistant initially, but once I made it clear that we wanted to hear his perspective, he said he found it actually very valuable because he got to share his perspective, and then after the panel, all of these experts from these different areas of healthcare kind of compared notes, and we had people in the audience who were pretty prominent, like the Life Flight director and the Maine Medical Association attended. So there was a lot of knowledge and expertise in the room that kind of stayed after and mingled and talked about solutions, which was really heartening to see. And the big takeaway was kind of surprising from the conversation. I mean, certainly there's a lot to talk about healthcare, but housing came up a lot, which was interesting. It was kind of a surprise to me, although I'm sure we all know that housing is a huge challenge across the state. But in particular, in healthcare, it's a problem because these systems face staff shortages. It's really hard to recruit and keep people, but also it's really hard to find housing if you do recruit someone to your rural hospital, or even just, in Portland, it's really hard. And so housing came up as a challenge in that way. And then if you can't find staff, you have to bring in expensive outside staff. So traveling nurses, if you've heard of that, people can come in from out of state and they get paid much higher rates because they're supposed to be kind of an emergency service. But they come in and then they require housing in these rural areas and take away some housing from the local community. And so our public health expert from Dover-Foxcroft talked about seeing an increase in homelessness and housing challenges as a result of this staffing crunch in the healthcare system. So it's all interrelated and complicated.
And we had somebody there that was talking about legislation. The legislators were all actually in session at the time, so they didn't come. But we did have a couple people there that were talking about legislation that was on the table. And Kate, I want to turn back to you and sort of focus back in on Augusta, because covering what's happening in Augusta at the state capitol, what's coming out of the legislature, is a big priority for the Maine Monitor. I wanted to see if you could talk a little about how that fits in and how the newsroom chooses how to cover that, because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do coverage of particular bills. Those of you who have read us will see that we do follow certain pieces of legislation. But, one of the things that we also do is we gather and present a lot of data. So last election season, we actually set about on a project to not interview, but survey all of the candidates for office in Maine at every level. It was a huge undertaking that took a number of folks in the newsroom. And, we didn't get everyone, but we made a pretty good dent, and we wound up, we published all of these candidate surveys on our website, so you could go. We had a little search bar where you could figure out who your local legislators were and who was running for office, and then you could see how they had responded to our surveys. So we called that our election hub, and that was something we presented last election season. But then we realized that, people also need an easy way to figure out what these folks are doing once they are actually elected to office. And so we built what we called our State House Hub, which has been truly an amazing resource for me. I use it all the time. It lives on our website. I think the reporters use it all the time as well. And this is a place where you can go and look up, you can look up who your legislator is. You can see all of the bills that are being considered by lawmakers. You can see not only their titles, but a little summary. You can see where they are in the process. So, are they in committee? Have they passed out of committee? Have they been signed into law? Each bill is linked to the actual, text on the state website. So you can go and you can read all of the testimony. You can sort the bills by committee. It's an incredible resource. And I will say, this was information that was out there. It exists on the state website. It's just really hard to navigate, and it's not in any sort of easy format. But yeah, so it's not, it's not in an easily accessible format. So what we did was we made this living space, which we will update every single session, and it's just a really easy tool for people to use to figure out what their lawmakers are doing. We are also planning to add to it. We're working really hard with a team over at Stanford University on a project that will allow us to add a section where you can see all of the votes that were taken by your lawmakers at both the state and the federal level. So we will have sort of a congressional voting hub where you can see how they voted on all those bills, and then you will also be able to see how your local lawmakers voted on the bills. I'm hoping that we've been working on that for a few months now. I think it will be out this fall, but that's really exciting. So, again, you can't print that one in a newspaper, so nobody's printed our State House Hub, but it is a free resource for anyone in the state to use, and so yeah, I think that coupled with some of these stories that we do just following the bills has been really, really powerful.
Yeah, and the State House Hub has a section that is about our legislative reporting as well, so people can go and read the analysis and the reporters digging into the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rose, data is a big part of a lot of the reporting projects that we undertake, but I think one of the things that our reporters try and do is still tell the personal story, so not just the data, but the people that are at the center of it. And I wonder if you could talk as a reporter about how you're finding that balance of just telling the facts, the data, while also illustrating it with how it's impacting real life Mainers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the perfect story has a balance of both, I would say. And I don't naturally have a data background, so it's been something that I've learned on the job, but it, especially being at the Monitor where you can really kind of dive into these deep issues, data is so crucial for kind of looking at systemic issues and trends. Obviously all stories have some, data facts, but for a kind of deep dive into information, it really makes a huge difference. But at the end of the day, you still, human stories are based in humans, and so you need that human perspective on it. So an example is I spent 18 months working on a project about assisted living facilities through the ProPublica's local reporting network, so these are facilities that provide a slightly lower level of care than a nursing home, and we got records for 3 years of inspection reports for 200 facilities just to see what was going on in these places, because I had gotten some news tips about some concerning care. And so we built this database breaking out 500 documents into each individual citation, so we could look at which kinds of citations were happening most frequently, where they were happening, and how the state was responding to it. So all of that is super important, but that alone isn't the crux of the story. It's you do all of this data work so that you can boil it down into some findings, but then you need a human to be like, so why does this matter? What does this actually look like to a human being? And I can cite all sorts of numbers about numbers of violations, but if I tell you a specific story where a gentleman who had a severe peanut allergy was fed a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch and went into anaphylactic shock and had to go to the hospital and ended up dying. I mean, that's the tangible impact of what I was seeing in those reports. And so, especially at the Monitor, we can spend a lot of time to really dig into what we're seeing, and then also spend time with human beings and understand what that actually means.
And I do want to leave time for questions, but before we maybe turn it over to the audience for questions, Kate, I wonder if you can sort of reflect on where the Monitor was and where we're going. Because in the last 3 years, with generous support from foundations like the Emerson Collective and individuals, some of you in this room, we have been able to grow our newsroom from, in 2022, we were 3 full-time reporters, 1 editor, 1 digital editor. Now we're 7 full-time reporters, supported by 2 full-time editors, digital editor, and an audience engagement director. So that's a huge increase in just a few years. Talk about that journey, and then talk about what's next. What are we planning?
Yeah. Well, Mika's also being a little modest. She is one of the huge driving forces behind this, the growth of our newsroom, which is, a growing newsroom, as Peter mentioned, especially in local news, is not a usual thing. So I do feel very privileged to be able to sit up here and say that we are growing. Yeah, I mean, we have seen, tremendous growth in the newsroom, and we are able to just cover far more than we once did. We are bringing on a housing beat this fall, which I'm really excited about. We recently started a beat on, which I believe is the first in the state, dedicated to covering religion, politics, and society. That one is also, we have a wonderful relationship with the Report for America, which for those of you who don't know is both Rose and I were Report for America Corps members. It's a national service program that places journalists in underserved areas across the country. So we actually have 2 Report for America Corps members this year. We have one, as I mentioned, dedicated to covering religion, politics, and society. And we have another that we are sharing with the Bangor Daily News covering state and local government. So those are both fantastic positions. We have as I mentioned, we have this new collaboration with our partners at the Bangor Daily News' investigative unit, which is Maine Focus, which has been fantastic. We also have some wonderful fellows this year who are with us for the summer. Yasmin Khan is right in the audience here. She's great. She came to us from Harvard University and is here for 12 weeks. We have another fellow, Stacy, who is also with us, and they've been doing some wonderful reporting. Yasmin has been actually published a great story just, it's Sunday, so this morning, about how the housing crisis has affected victims of domestic violence who are now having to stay far longer in shelters and reducing the turnover rate in shelters across the state. So, yeah, I mean, we've just seen tremendous growth in the newsroom, which is really exciting. And moving forward, we have some really exciting things coming this fall. In particular, we have just sort of finalized a partnership with Notice, which is News Organization of the United States, right? Yeah, this is the plan.
Newsroom of the United States.
Newsroom of the United States. Thank you. With Notice and the VT Digger, we will have a shared reporter who will be based in Washington, D.C., and will cover the congressional delegations of Maine and Vermont. And all of the reporting that they produce will be free for us and for our partners to republish. So that's really very exciting. We've expanded this year into TV, which is a new venture for us, and we have a great partnership with News Center Maine, where we have a reporter on every week to talk about one of the stories that we've worked on. It's just a great way for us to reach a new audience that we weren't reaching before. We do a monthly radio program with WERU, which the staff produce and host, which is really fun. And so, yeah, we are fighting the death of local news as comprehensively as possible.
And I think the really important takeaway from our growth is that we are able to cover a lot more issues and have a lot more impact. And that's ultimately how we measure ourselves, is what is our impact. We don't really pay attention so much to clicks. We don't measure that. We don't tell the journalists how many clicks are on their articles, because we want them to stay focused on the story, on the data, on what it means for people in Maine, so really looking at the issues. But their stories have impact. They have impact at the legislature. We've had, just this past year, seen results from our reporting, changes to probate court oversight, changes to mining laws, changes to oversight of medical cannabis. We've seen, as Kate mentioned, the public defender's office really was a huge impact and outcome from our reporting. But we see it at the local level too. I think one of the things about that Emden story that Kate talked about, the people in Emden were really appreciative of the time that Christian took to really get at all sides of that story and tell all of the details of what the implications were, to the point that she was chased down by the city council, by the town clerk. The town clerk chased her down in Freeport to say thank you for doing the story. But we've seen a lot of results at individual level, at town level, and at the state level as a result of our reporting. And that's, to go back to Kate's original comment about getting people information that they couldn't otherwise get on their own, that really does drive us, is getting people information to empower them to be engaged in their cities, communities, and their state. So that's why our growth is exciting, is because we're able to do more reporting and deliver more information for Mainers. So with that, why don't I stop? And I think we have about 15, 20 minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions for us, I know we'd be happy to take those. Yeah.
Yes. The question is, what are your sources of income and funding, and what's your outlook for that in the current economic and political climate?
Yeah, so the question was, what are our sources of income, and what's the outcome, or what's the outlook? So we are 100% philanthropically supported. About 60% of that is foundation grants, and 40% of that is individuals. We currently have about 1,500 active individual donors. That has been growing over the last few years, which is partly why we're able to have the growth that we've seen. We've also had increased foundation support over the last few years. The foundation support includes local Maine foundations, regional New England-based foundations, and then national foundations such as the Emerson Collective. We publish all that information, back to that transparency that I talked about earlier. All of the details of our funding, of our funders, is available on our website for every year. So we do update it every year so everybody can have, and then we archive it so you can go back and look at past years. Our 990s, our tax forms are on the website. Every year, every fiscal year, our fiscal year runs from January to December 31st. And I should say we don't get state or federal funding, so we aren't being caught up in that conversation directly. I will say indirectly, of course, now there's a lot more news organizations that need philanthropic support. And so that does keep me up at night sometimes. Every time we do 4 fundraising appeals a year. Our March appeal, our May appeal, both went very well. We're going to have one in August. We actually, we have good collaboration with all news organizations in Maine, and we actually called up Maine Public and said, when are you doing yours? Because we don't want to get in your way. So we actually postponed ours so that Maine Public can have free and clear fundraising. Theirs is starting this week. But we'll see. We did that to be generous, and hopefully it doesn't come back and hurt us. But we spend every fiscal year raising the money we need for that fiscal year. So we are not raising money for next year. We're still raising money to meet our needs this year. no advertising. We do have some sponsors, it's a very minor amount, but I'd love to see that grow. That's when I have time. It's on my list, but yeah, so fundraising is a 24/7, 365-day a year process for us. Yeah.
Questions. Do you do any editorials or have opinion writers? And also, Rose mentioned tariffs, the effect on medical costs. Are you considering or have you run anything about how the tariffs affect Maine people?
Yeah, so the questions are, the first one is, do we run op-eds, editorials? And the second one is, have we looked into the question of how tariffs are affecting Maine? So Kate, maybe you can.
Yeah, I'll talk about that, and then I'll let Rose maybe touch on some of the tariffs if she can about healthcare. So we do not run editorials. We don't run op-eds or any kind of opinion pieces or analysis. We've talked about it. We the Monitor in sort of a past life did a little bit of it. I think we are just not set up for it. At the moment, I mean, it takes a board of people to review those submissions, and we just don't have that, and we really want to focus on the news. So we don't do it now. I'm is there a future in which that's part of the Monitor? Maybe, but not sort of currently we want to focus our energy on just filling this this void of local news. And then to the question of tariffs, that's a really good question. We have done some kind of tangential reporting on tariffs a little bit, certainly about what's going on with Canada, but it's not something that we've dug into as deeply as I think I would like. We don't have any reporters dedicated solely to economics, and tariffs are very complicated. So I think there's a lot more for us to do there for sure. Yeah, and Rose, I don't know if you want to say anything about the healthcare impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I had my story came out this week about health insurance rates, so I touched on it with that and kind of looking at, there's going to be a significant impact on, health insurance industry is preparing for a huge increase in their expenditures on that. But beyond that, I would say if you have any suggestions on what I should be writing about related to healthcare and tariffs, I'm all ears. So.
I'll just add one quick note on the editorial and op-ed. We are nonpartisan, and we really try and maintain that. And so when we did talk about editorials, we did make the decision that we really want to make sure our readers really believe in that they see that we really are nonpartisan, that we're not taking a position. We're trying to present really deeply reported, factual journalism that helps inform their opinions. And so that was part of the calculation, as well as the fact that we just don't, we would want to do it in a really thorough way. Yeah.
You mentioned several ways in which you measure impact. One, I think, was a change in legislation, and other were comments from elected officials who thanked you for the coverage or whatever. Do you count the citations of Maine Monitor, and how has that been trending over your 7 years? Is that 4?
Yeah. So the question was about measuring impact, and how do we include citations of our work? It's a really good question. Our latest impact report is actually out on, there's a table out there with materials. Please feel free to take any of them. Please take our latest impact report. And in that, actually, we do talk about what does impact mean for us. It really goes from, did we move a reader? Did a reader engage in some way? So a lot of times the reporters will hear from readers saying, wow, your story caused me to write my legislator or to reach out to my city council person. That's sort of one level. Next level is, was there some organizational or institutional action. And then, of course, I mean, legislation or a change to regulations is kind of the top. We're actually going through one of our other fellows, who's a development fellow, is working with me on doing a really deliberate analysis of how we should be measuring impact. And citations is one of the things that we've been talking about. We were recently cited in the New York Times, which amazing the number of people that forwarded it to me as if I wouldn't have already seen it. But I was happy that people were paying attention. It is useful. And one of it was a piece of Christians, an academic reached out to Christian to actually ask about using her piece in the academics research. So it is something that we do want to start capturing because we haven't done it. I mean, we do record republication, so we do have those numbers, but not sort of citations of our work. Okay, I'm gonna go with the guy in the Patriots shirt there, and then yes.
I'm impressed with what you're doing here in Maine. I'm also concerned with the overall national journalism decline. My formative years were in the Delaware Valley, and the big gorilla in the room was the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I was shocked down to my shoe tops a few years ago to see that it had gone nonprofit. And I think they're still doing that. I haven't heard that they're gone. I think they're still there. But it seems to me a lot of the major newspapers in the country are kind of folding, but they're also adopting the Sears and Roebuck department store model of disintegration. You know, it seems to just be sliding down. So, some newspapers that figure out what to do, the Wall Street Journal, I think, and the New York Times, but there are many others that seem to be following the Sears model. For instance, the Washington Post is probably doing that right now. Is there anything in your model or in the Emerson Collective's model that has application to these distressed situations with papers that have national influence? I only hear in Maine, which you must have thought about.
So the question is there anything that we've, I guess I'll phrase it this way, is there anything that we've learned as the Maine Monitor or the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting that as a nonprofit news organization that might be applicable to other news organizations that are struggling? And Peter, please feel free to jump in on this one, because you are the expert on what's happening in the nation on news. I think, I might take it and still keep it a little bit local. So if you look at what is happening in the Maine news ecosystem, it's interesting because our news organizations are trying different models to try and save themselves. So there's ours, nonprofit, fully 100% nonprofit. The Bangor Daily News is a privately owned news organization, but it does have a development director who does apply for grants and runs fundraising, individual fundraising appeals. They've been very transparent when those donations could not be tax deductible. They since have gotten a fiscal sponsor, so those donations now are tax deductible. So they're sort of a privately held newspaper, but that's saying we can't survive if you don't help us survive. And then the Maine Trust for Local News, that's the collection of 20 newspapers that was purchased by the National Trust for Local News, which the National Trust is a nonprofit, and the Maine Trust newspapers are being run as a low-profit corporation where any profit is being just returned into the organization. So there's different models out there. I think I don't know, I would invite Peter to talk about saving places like the Washington Post or the New York Times, but I will say that when I talk to my colleagues in news here in Maine about what model works best, I say nonprofit's not a fix-all. It's hard work. Like I just said, it is a 365, 24/7 operation of trying to raise money. So it's not the solution for everyone. We don't require people to pay for our news, but we certainly encourage them to pay for our news. And we have a number of different newsletters. One of our newsletters is a daily digest. At the end of the day, George, our digital editor, does a recap, kind of what are the highlights of news that you might have missed today that you need to see. And while we don't put our news behind a paywall, some of our colleagues do. And in that daily digest, we do say, hey, some of these are behind a paywall. Please consider paying them for their news, because that's what they need to survive. So I think that there's no silver bullet for journalism right now. I will say that I think there is no model for journalism going forward that does not include some kind of philanthropic component. And I truly believe in journalism as a public good. And I think that's how we all need to think about it going forward.
Can I just say something briefly on the editorial side as well? I mean, I think the other thing that we are seeing on the editorial side in terms of trying to save news is collaboration. The news business is still, in many sectors, a very cutthroat one. But, what we have been doing forever is, we give away our reporting, but we also have these partnerships. We have this one with the Bangor Daily News. We are constantly doing projects with other journalists. We do it at the national level. We've done it with Time. We've done it with the Boston Globe. And so on sort of the editorial side of things, I think what news organizations are realizing is that we are much stronger together and that we should, sort of divide and conquer and use our resources more wisely.
I was told one more question. And I think you had a question over here. Sorry, I'll stay later and answer the question.
I was just curious about how a local newspaper decides what to cover. The stories that you choose to report on in your local environment.
Yeah, the question is, how does a local paper decide what stories to cover? Kate, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
That's a great question. It's one we get asked all the time. It depends a little bit on the level of the paper, right? So I was a beat reporter for the Ellsworth American, which is a weekly newspaper in Ellsworth. I covered all of the city council. I went to all the school board meetings. So, that was very sort of geographic. I was tasked with covering Ellsworth. As a statewide news organization, what we look for are trends. So is this thing that we saw happening in Emden, like that story that I mentioned, is this happening elsewhere in the state? And if it is, what are the connection points between those stories? And how can we use that one, that example of that town to look at this with a broader lens? It can be in a variety of areas, but that's really what we look for when trying to figure out where to cover. And what we have the bandwidth for. We are not a 30-person newsroom. We have grown and it's fantastic, but we are still just a 7-person newsroom. So we do have to make decisions. We cannot get to all of the tips that I think are important. That's another place where we do sometimes pass them on to our colleagues at other organizations. If there are, we got a tip the other day about something that was going on in Waldo County, and we said, really interesting story. We don't necessarily see the statewide impact, but we sent it over to the folks at the Mid-Coast Villager and said, I think you might be interested in this. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I did mention we do have a table out here with a lot of different materials, our impact report, water bottles. The water bottles are celebrating our 15th anniversary. Please take one, take two. And we also have a flyer illustrating our different newsletters. Rose does a newsletter on Thursdays, the Health Monitor, which features her original reporting on health issues and gives you some insights into other health issues that you might want to be looking at. We're happy to help you sign up for our newsletters. As we said, they're free. the best way to support us, other than giving us donations, which we always take, but is to read our news and to share it, to spread the word. We are trying to make sure that more and more people are aware of our journalism and can benefit from it. So please come by. Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you so much, Mika and Kate and Rose and Yasmin as the internist. I think you can tell that these, I'll call them women, but they're people, are true professionals. They have excellent credentials before they even came to the Maine Monitor, and they're putting them to work to make local governments accountable, to inform the state's population about issues like health. I think it would be interesting. It's so easy to find Rose's work on health insurance costs and then build that into letters to your elected officials at the state and federal level to point up the increases that are expected up to 30%. So I commend the publication to all of you. I commend the Emerson Collective for recognizing their professionalism and giving them support. And I suspect we'll have them back in a short time to hear what, maybe you'll have grown from 7 to who knows how many reporters at that point. Dream big, ladies, dream big. So thank you all for coming. See you next week, and have a good week in the meantime.